Good evening, dear church. As always, it is a wonderful honor tonight to share with you some thoughts that I think is very important as we're trying to reach people with the gospel of Christ. And this section of lessons, I believe, is valuable to us, not only in giving us tools that defends our faith, but these are some ideas that really helps strengthen our faith. And I hope that it's been a blessing to you so far. Some of these things you have to maybe go think about a little bit more and top over. And for those of you who were here last week or did listen to the lesson, I spoke last week about three key objections that atheists have to the Christian faith. And those were the Big Bang. Secondly, the massive universe. First of all, the Big Bang. Some people believe that, well, because we know now how the universe started through the Big Bang, that means that God is not necessary to be part of the process at all, and that is not the case. Secondly, the idea of the massive universe. If this massive universe is so huge, why would God be so concerned about what's going on in the planet? And so they use that as evidence that God does not exist. And then another argument is the hidden God. And the idea that people present there is that if God exists, why does he make it so hard for us to know that he exists? Why doesn't he just come down or sign every molecule, designed by God? And I dealt with those three things last week. But we've got a lot of things to say tonight. So I'm going to dive directly into it. And I'm going to start with point number 4. The fourth objection to Christianity is that of evil and suffering. And this is perhaps one of the biggest reasons why people disbelieve in God. It is no new problem for atheists. Epicurus, 2,300 years ago, the ancient Greek philosopher said the following: is God willing to prevent evil but not able? Then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? And the point is this that people make: if God is love and he has all power and he knows everything, then surely he can prevent evil and pain and suffering, right? Wouldn't you say that is a good argument? Could he not have stopped Hitler from killing 6 million Jews? Could he have not stopped those guys flying into the World Trade Center, the 9/11 story? Could not have God have prevented the pain and the suffering of events like that? I think it's a good and it's a valid question that I think that we need to be able to answer. Evil and suffering exists whether you believe in God or not. It is a problem for atheists, it is a problem for theists, and both worldviews need to be able to answer it. And what I'll be presenting now is that atheism doesn't have an answer for evil and suffering, yet Christianity does. Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, said the following: the world has no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Now that is an atheistic statement, and I believe that it is irrational. The reason why it's irrational is because Richard Dawkins, look at that statement, it says there's no evil and no good. That's what he's saying. That's what an atheist is saying. There's no objective moral good. We'll talk about that in a moment. But Richard Dawkins himself would say that the rape of a 6-month-old baby is evil. And so it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. Evil exists. And there's something wrong with you if you don't agree. Now, I'm going to give 3 reasons from a Christian perspective why evil and suffering exists. The first thing is this: love. Love. According to the Christian worldview, God is love. Isn't that so? 1 John 4 verse 8, God is love. And the purpose of his creation is love. And what Jesus did on the cross is all about love. But for love to be real and genuine, there must be a choice. Forced love is not love at all. Okay, it doesn't. Love cannot exist unless people have free will and can freely love out of their own. So we can honor God or not. We can love God or not. We can obey him or not. We have a choice, and that is where evil comes in. Evil exists because human beings have free will. Evil is a free will choice against the will of God. And God permits us to practice our own choices. Otherwise, we would just be puppets and robots. I hope that makes sense. And I doubt that any atheist would like that idea. Therefore, the evil in the world is the consequence of people's choices, whom God has given free will to act as free agents. If you want to know why people are suffering and why evil exists, it's because people sin. And people have got free will. And then you ask the question, but why do people sin? Well, people sin because God doesn't want to violate their free will. And so He gives them free reign, and God wants them to love Him out of their own. The Twin Towers, who was it? It was people. Who killed those 6 million Jews? It was Hitler. It was a person. People decided against the will of God, and that in turn has hurt other people. Okay? So suffering is a result of evil. Evil is a result of people who go against the will of God, who use their free will not to love. There's a second reason. Purpose. Since God seeks genuine love, He had to create free creatures. But free creatures have the option to sin, and sin creates evil, which in turn creates suffering. But what about natural evil? So I've spoken now about moral evil. It's the decisions that people make that hurts others. What about natural evil? Natural evil is when nature hurts us, like tornadoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis. Who sinned there? I think we can make an argument, as many theologians, and I think a certain biblical text, that when Adam and Eve sinned, that changed nature as well. And so even nature itself is reacting in a way to sin. But Sam Harris, a famous atheist, I don't even want to mention his name, he said the following, and think about this. Either God can do nothing to stop catastrophes, or He doesn't care to, or He doesn't exist. God is either impotent, evil, or imaginary. Take your pick and choose wisely. And so Sam Harris is trying to say here that he cannot understand why God would allow natural catastrophes like tsunamis and earthquakes, etc. And on the surface, it seems like he's got a point. But Harris is neglecting another possibility that you and I believe in. And this is how I would say it. Or God doesn't stop catastrophes because He has a larger purpose with them. He has a larger purpose with them. If God is the ruler of the universe, He could allow tsunamis and earthquakes and all of those types of things to take place because He's got a larger purpose with those things. So to the atheist, there is no purpose in anything. I go through pain. I don't understand why. There is no reason. It just happens. Whereas the Christian worldview explains that there's a reason for these things. Even God's own Son went through tremendous suffering at the age of 33, died on the cross for a larger purpose, to redeem mankind, and through that to show His love to the human race. And just by the way, if you go look at all the catastrophes that take place in the world, they take place most of the time, and in most instances, at the most ungodly places, or the places that deny God. Go look in the East. Most of it happens in the East, the place that is most in opposition to the Christian God. Thirdly, justice. That's a very important point to just make. The atheistic worldview is pitiful. And here's why. When Hitler realized he was backed into a corner, he went into a bunker or to an underground room, and he shot himself, him and his wife. Hitler never paid for what he had done. We can talk about the 9/11 hijackers. They never stood in front of a court. They died in that plane. They never paid for what they had done. We can talk about Jack the Ripper. He never paid for what he has done. They've never found him. They don't know who he is. There has been no justice for these people. What a pitiful world we live in if people escape and are never held accountable for what they have done. This is atheism. No accountability, no justice, no reward. Think of Martin Luther King Jr., for example. He was assassinated. Did he ever get a reward for what he actually did? If God doesn't exist, he never got a reward for what he spent his life doing. So, what about those numerous criminals that have gone to death row or has been in prison for a long time for crimes that they've never committed? What about them? The Christian worldview says there will be an ultimate day of reckoning, there will be an ultimate judgment day, and each person will pay for what they've done. And so this is the problem with atheism. Atheism agrees that evil exists, but atheism cannot account for how people who do evil will be held accountable if they've never been held accountable on this planet. So I think these are three very important reasons why suffering exists. Love. For love to exist, there has to be free will. And because there's free will, people sin and they hurt each other. That's where evil and suffering comes from. Secondly, purpose. That sometimes things happen to us that seems irrational. It's caused by nature, but we can trust that it's going to be okay because there's a reason behind it. And thirdly, if atheism is true, then people will never pay for what they have done in this world. And there will be no reward and there will be no punishment. The fifth point that I would like to propose that atheists have against Christianity is about the age of the earth. The Bible tells us that the earth was created in 6 days. Now, if we calculate the biblical ages of people, we come to sort of a date that the earth is about 6,000 years old. But most conservative Christians would agree with that the earth is about 6,000 years old. Yet scientists claim that the earth is 4.6 billion years old and that the universe is about 13 or 14 billion years old. So you can understand why this is a controversial topic. It's a clear indication of how science and the Bible contradicts each other. Now, the atheist would obviously side with that of science, and so through that they say, well, the Bible is discredited because the Bible does not say the earth is 4.6 billion years old. And if one thing in the Bible is discredited, then everything in the Bible is discredited. And if the Bible is discredited, then the God of the Bible is also discredited. So, without going into detailed analysis, I just want to make 3 points about this. First of all, the dating is infallible. If somebody comes to you and says to you, the dating is fallible. Okay, it isn't infallible. Somebody comes to you and says, well, the earth is 14 billion years old and it's a fact. Then you say, no, it's not a fact. Okay. And atheists claim to hold on to that. Well, it's a scientific fact that the earth is that. No, it's actually not. You need to take it with a pinch of salt. Radiocarbon dating, which is a dating method that started in 1946. It's less than 80 years old, is used to date stuff. And it's not accurate for anything older than 20,000 years. Okay. That is a fact. You can look at the geology of the earth, the rock layers, for example, in the Grand Canyon, and that's maybe a little bit more accurate. But the problem with that is that it assumes that rock is always petrified, or things have always petrified, matter is always petrified at the same rate as it does today. And we just don't have evidence for that at all. Now, I mentioned just these two things just quickly, not to discredit dating methods, but to just assert that it's not 100% fact that the earth is 4.6 billion years old. There are assumptions involved in the process. So these assumptions, we need to keep that in mind, that you can't say it's a fact that is how old the earth is. In actual fact, there's loads of scientific evidence that the earth could be young. And if you want that information, I can give that to you as well. Many researchers, and this is very interesting for me, many researchers researching the probability, listen to this carefully, of random ordering of biological molecules have concluded that this is extremely remote, even in 14 billion years of time. Barrow and Tipler wrote they're two physicists, and they wrote in their book, The Anthropic Cosmological Principle, they list 10 steps in the course of human evolution, each of which is so improbable that before it would occur, the sun would have ceased to be a main sequence star and incinerated the earth. In other words, according to evolutionary science, the dating of the earth is incorrect. So let me just get this. So they've got methods of working out how old the universe is, 14 billion years, and the earth is 4.6 billion years old. Yet there are scientists who's calculated the time that it would take for evolution to take place as we understand it. And they are saying that the time frame needed for evolution to take place is so long that the sun would have stopped shining. So what do we have here? We've got science contradicting science. If evolution is true, then the earth is much older than 14 billion years. Well, the universe much older than 14 billion years. And the earth much older than 4 billion. In actual fact, if evolution was true, we wouldn't be able to even be alive anymore, because the sun would have been older. Dead. So what do we have? Christians say that creation is possible in 6,000 years. Science says evolution isn't possible in 14 billion years. So what do we have? Science contradicts science. So the dating of the earth that is accepted by scientists are both a problem to the scientific community and to many Christians. So what is the point? We should be very careful to put our hopes on dating. The scientists are not even sure about it. They are debating how old the universe is. And whenever we hear words like possibly or probably, throw out those words. So that's point number one. Don't just trust the dating. Okay, we can't just trust the dating. There's too many contradictions and too many maybes and possibilities. Number two, the Bible nowhere gives the date of the earth. So if somebody comes to you and says, man, you know what? Christianity is not true because the Bible says the earth is 6,000 years old and that contradicts science. Then you say, well, first of all, your dating method, I don't trust that. Secondly, you say, well, where does the Bible say the earth is 6,000 years old? Archbishop James Ussher, he calculated the earth's birth date to 4004 BC. The Venerable Bede believed creation happened in 3995 BC. Isaac Newton suggested that the creation took place at 3998 BC. As you note here, these are dates proposed by men, fallible men, and some of them were even scientists. So the Bible nowhere contains such a date. If you found a date of creation, please bring it. And Christians should be careful to defend dates that men has proposed. Ladies and gentlemen, Scripture is not a scientific book. It is a spiritual book. It is a religious book. The creation of the earth in Genesis teaches us that God created through His power, that He brought order to chaos, that He is our creator. When did all this happen? We don't know. The Bible doesn't give a date. It just says in the beginning. That's it. And we've got to be careful that we go beyond what is written. The Bible does not give us a date of creation. So we shouldn't feel compelled to make an argument for a date if the Bible doesn't give a date. So when this beginning was, we don't know. Some have obviously pointed out to the 6 days of creation, claiming that it's 24 literal days. And that is one interpretation. There are, however, other interpretations that doesn't necessitate a 724-hour creation. For example, the sun was only created on the 4th day. Well, how could we then say that the first 3 days were 24-hour days if the sun haven't even existed? Because we claim that 24-hour days are happen based on the movement of the earth around the sun. We can also look at the 7th day. The 7 days, we are still in the 7th day according to Revelation, according to Genesis chapter 1. So we're still in the 7th day, and that clearly isn't a 24-hour day. So can we really say that every day in Genesis is a 24-hour day? But nevertheless, those are debates and discussions for another day. The point is just this. Genesis chapter 1 was never written to tell us when creation took place. It was written to tell us who created and why. And that is far more important. If we believe that God created it all, does it really matter when? So, much can be said, but that's just the second point I'd like to say. The Bible does not give us a date of creation. Number 3, what matters most is not the timing of creation, but the timing of Jesus. Christopher Hitchens has on a number of occasions, and I've shared this with you before, but on a number of occasions, and he was a famous atheist, posited the ridiculousness of Jesus coming so late in human history. Why didn't Jesus come at the beginning of creation? He could have saved the whole human race. Yet, the interesting point is that the Population Reference Bureau estimated that there's been about 105 billion people that have ever existed on the planet, that have ever lived, and 2% of those 105 billion people were born before Jesus. Isn't that interesting? That 2% of the world's population that have ever lived before Jesus. That means that 98% of all people that have ever lived were born after Jesus. And we've spoken about this before, that Jesus came at exactly the right time. As the Romans have created a kingdom that was filled with brilliant roads so that the message of the cross could spread all over the world. Greek Hellenism had spread throughout the world. The Greek language had taken over the whole Roman area so that the message, this beautiful language, Greek language, could carry the message of Jesus throughout the whole known world. Jesus came at exactly the right time, according to Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4. And so the real question that we should be asking is, why did Jesus come when he did come? And we shouldn't be that much concerned about the dating of creation, but the dating of God's salvific work in the world. So that is the answer that I would give regarding the age of the earth. And let me just recap that just briefly so that we understand it fully. First of all, the dating that scientists give for the date of the earth is not infallible. Secondly, the Bible doesn't take a position on the date of the earth, so you don't even have to defend that. And thirdly, what matters most is not the dating of creation, but the dating and the timing of Jesus's work on the earth. And this is where many atheists misunderstand it. They want to go to Genesis. They always want to debate the first 12 chapters of the book of Genesis, but they don't want to talk about Jesus because it's a historical fact that he lived. And we need to bring people to that always. The purpose of God's work on the earth is to save mankind, and we see that in Jesus Christ, and we always need to take people to the cross. And then the sixth point is this: morality. And this is perhaps the most sensitive part. Most arguments that we can make for God and against God are not close to people's lives. But when we talk of morality, we touch people's lives. We touch what they do in their everyday existence. And this is perhaps the key reason, as I've said before, why many people disbelieve in God, because they don't want to be held accountable for their moral actions. The central statements that atheists pose is this: I don't need God to be a good person. I don't need God to be a good person. And yes, that is true. You don't need God to be a good person. Whether you believe in God or not, you can do good things. But here's the problem. If God doesn't exist, you won't know what good is. That's the problem. Theism provides objective morality, and atheism doesn't. So Dr. William Lane Craig, the great apologist, presents an argument, a moral argument for the existence of God. Premise number 1 says this: if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2, objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. Most atheists would agree with premise number 1. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. In other words, atheists believe that there is no good and there is no evil in the world. That's what they say, in order to defend the view that morality doesn't exist. And so they say morality is subjective. In other words, what you think is good and right is what's good and right to you. We can't agree on what is good and what is right. What is right and good for me might not be right and good for you. And Christianity agrees with this. Christianity agrees that if there is no God, yes, then we can all decide what is good and what is not good. For you, murder might be good. For me, murder might be bad, and that is just fine. But we know that that is not the truth. We know that whether you're a Christian or not, we all agree raping babies is wrong. We all agree that murder is wrong. So there is an objective morality, and we cannot deny that. Romans 2 verse 14 says, the requirements of the law have been written on our hearts. Every person on the planet, whether atheist or theist, knows intrinsically what is good and bad, evil and good, according to the Christian worldview. And so we do believe that there's an objective moral standard. God has written His laws on our hearts. We all know what is good and bad. Let's look at the second premise. And to remind you of the second premise is the following: objective moral values and duties do exist. If we look at our human experience, it is quite evident that objective moral values and duties do exist. All people, or shall I say 99.999% of people, would agree that infanticide and murder and rape is evil. And Christianity has an explanation for that atheism doesn't have. Atheism has suggested that good is determined by the survival of the species. In other words, they would say, well, we know what is good based on how the species will survive. In other words, yes, we all agree that murder is wrong because it's preventing the survival of the species. But that is not always the case. And so they would say that humans developed a moral sense through evolution. They've developed their own moral code. It wasn't imprinted on us from God. And usually they refer to two ideas. The first is reciprocal altruism. And I know these are complex terms, but I'll explain that. And it carries the idea that if you're nice to me, I will be nice to you. In other words, that's why human beings do good things. Because through evolution, they've become beings that will do nice things to people because they're nice to them. Okay? And so it's a type of morality that's based on your self-interest. And then there's the shared gene. Because you and I share the same gene, I'm willing to jump into a burning car to save my kid. I'm willing to jump into a river to save another person because we share a gene. Okay. So now there might be some validity on that. That's the atheist argument, by the way. But they cannot explain other forms of morality. For example, when you climb into a bus and you wanted to, as Dinesh D'Souza once explained, you want to climb into a bus and there's an old lady and you are sitting down and the old lady climbs into the bus. What's going to make you stand up and give your seat to the old lady? Is it reciprocal altruism? Is it because if you give her your seat today, she's going to give you her seat next week? No, it doesn't work that way. Are you doing it because you're sharing a gene? No, because she's nothing of you. She's not a family member. Do you see where nothing explains why people do good things? Nothing explains why something is good and right if God does not exist. Hope you get that. I hope that's not too complex or too difficult. There are more issues regarding atheism's morality, and these are very simple arguments. Atheists claim that humans are just animals. If this is true, then humans and animals should have the same morality, wouldn't you agree? Yet nature tells a different story. Let me give you some examples. Animals kill other animals from the same species, but we don't call it murder. Interesting. Male sharks copulate with female sharks, but we don't call it rape. Meerkat pups are often killed by dominant mothers in the group, but we don't call it infanticide. Why is there an outcry when humans behave like animals, even though they are just animals, according to the atheistic worldview? The answer is simple. Humans are not just animals. They are moral beings subjected to objective morality. And if we carefully consider modern atheistic trends, the plot thickens. If morality exists for the survival of the species, then many atheistic ideals don't make sense. Here's some more things. More than 80% of atheists support abortion. Yet abortion doesn't help the species survive. It helps the species die out. More than 90% of atheists are in support of homosexuality. Yet homosexuality prohibits and limits the growth of species population since it eliminates reproduction. Two men cannot produce babies. More than 70% of atheists support transgenderism to the full extent, yet 40% of transgender people will attempt suicide in their lives, which shows that transgenderism results in working against the evolutionary desire for the survival of the species. Clearly, there is no evolutionary basis for objective morality. Lots of stuff have been said, but I hope that it is quite clear. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not just animals. There is an objective morality. Atheism cannot explain that. The laws of God have been written on the hearts of every human being. I hope that some things, I know this might have been quick and it might have been quite complex, but I hope that something, maybe just one thing, have stuck into your mind that helps you understand that atheism has no foot to stand on, and that Christianity is rational and the existence of God is rational, and that we can believe everything that is written in the Word of God, and that we can extend it throughout our lives, and it will be a blessing to us. Why? Because it is true. It is truth. God bless you, and I'll see you again next week. Love you all. Bye-bye.